Hello everyone, welcome to another lecture in 1319, and today we'll be doing chapter 5 from Loosening the Grip, which is the etiology of substance use disorders, or of alcohol use disorders, what the title is, but it applies to the other substances as well. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Where does this particular illness come from? How does it develop? Where does it go? What stages, again, does it go through? And we've talked about a good deal of that before. Also, in our non-synchronous reality of the World Wide Web, where we're spending a lot of our time during this year of our Lord 2020, the year of plague, we will, this video will be made available to you on the day before Election Day. So I'm also going to encourage you to make sure that you vote by tomorrow to exercise your civil responsibility to yourself and to your nation. Especially women, especially you women out there. It's only been 100 years ago since women got the right to vote. And just to remind you, no one gave you that right. The women who came before you took it. And they paid a price for taking it too. So use it. And that's the end of my lecture on that today. Back into drug addiction. I'm going to jump over to my share my screen with you and we'll just get started. I hope you can see that. I'm feeling real insecure about it. I've done a bunch of these, but I'm still feeling a little insecure about it. DSM 1 through 5, Alcoholics Anonymous, Sigmund Freud, all have tackled the notion of the cause of a disease and whether substance use disorder is a disease. And as we've talked about before, in this class and in other classes, the disease concept is widely accepted, but it's not universally accepted. How a disease gets to be a disease is when the people who put together the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 get together and say, this is an illness, and that's how it becomes, and we tried to explain illness, of course, by defining symptoms and attaching names to those to the diseases that those symptoms represent, and coming up with treatments and what have you. Substance use disordered individuals don't leap fully formed onto the scene. And there was a shortcoming of Alcoholics Anonymous. They tried to address it by allowing the individual to make a choice for themselves, to practice self-diagnosis. You're a substance abuser when you say so, and if you say you're cured, well, our hats are off to you. But that's kind of someone walks in and they have this illness and they make a decision whether this recovery is for them or isn't. And that's kind of simplistic, actually, if you get right down to it. And I know there's some AA members sitting out there right now saying, well, of course, you silly man, you. It's a simple program. That's the way it's put together. That's how it's supposed to be. I'm not arguing with that. I'm just saying that suddenly a person shows up at AA and now they're an alcoholic. They weren't yesterday when they were down at Baby O's, were they? Or maybe they were and just not diagnosed. Then there's, so AA had his way of looking at it. Freud, of course, believed that alcoholism was an illness, and he tried to treat alcoholics. Back in his day, he did treat alcoholics. Somewhat unsuccessfully. No, spectacularly unsuccessfully, as a matter of fact. And he had his own way of looking at the illness and what constituted effective treatment. Giving them cocaine wasn't good treatment. He did figure that out before it was over with. So substance use disorder is a multivariate syndrome. It's got a lot of components. It's a complex illness, and it involves an interaction of some very complex factors that are biological, or physiological rather, social factors, cultural factors, and environmental factors that all come into play to create this substance use disorder. We know already, and we've talked about it to some extent, that some substances are addictive. Not all of them, some of them are. Some behaviors are addictive. Not all of them, but some of them are. If substances and/or behaviors are addictive, why isn't everyone who uses them addicted? And that's a very important question. I'm glad you asked it. The real deal is that certain individuals can use substances and go, that's interesting, and walk away from them. Others may abuse them for a while and maybe even need a little help getting off of them, but once they're off, they go about their merry way and don't have any problem with it anymore. And then there are people who are addicted, and that's a whole other ballgame. Some behaviors are addicted. Some people can look at porn and go, that's interesting, and walk away from it. They don't have to spend all their time on the websites. They don't have to spend all their time at massage parlors or wherever else, or topless bars, or wherever else they go to indulge. Some people go to Vegas on holiday and gamble and win a little money or lose a little money and come home and go, that was fun, I'll have to do that again. They don't come home and clean out all their finances and go back with the system because now they're going to break the Vegas bank. If that's going on, there's a problem. So what's the difference? What changes from one individual to the next to make a behavior a problem for one and not for another, to make a drug use a problem for one and not for another? Well, the public health model tries to address that to a certain extent. A combination of factors of the agent, and the agent is the drug, the behavior, the whatever that you get addicted to, and a combination of factors regarding the host, the person who's engaging in the behavior, the ingesting the agent or whatever. And these factors interact in such a way that they create a progression of illness. They create a disorder that can be recognized, diagnosed, treated, etc., and so forth. These factors are biological, psychological, they're social, and we have to consider all of them if we're going to provide good treatment and provide a service that's going to lead to a successful therapeutic outcome. Ethanol, alcohol, as we know, is a CNS depressant. And it slows things down for the individual who uses it. Slows down processes in the body. So why do people use it? Well, the simplistic, but still probably one of the best answers to that is it feels good. There's something very attractive about using alcohol for some of us. The first time I ever got drunk, and I was a late bloomer, I was like almost 17, and the first time I ever got drunk, it kind of scared me. No, it did scare me, because I had never been that out of control of my mind, my body, my emotions. I've never been that out of control before, and it freaked me out a little bit. And I drank way too much, and I was up at a fishing camp in Arkansas, right across the Mississippi River out of Memphis, at my grandfather's fishing camp. He ran there for DAAC Lumber Company. And I got really drunk. And I barfed all over myself out in the parking lot. My brother had to wash me off with a water hose before I could go back into the house and stuff. And man, the next day I was crippled. I mean, I had the worst freaking hangover. And I said, I'm never going to do this again. But truth of the matter is, I was drunk again inside of a week, and I set a pattern that lasted for around 14 years from that point. It feels good. There was something about it that was very attractive to me. And we'll talk about the rational addiction a little later on in the book. But to make a long story short, I was willing to trade the bad effects for the good effects. I was a lot younger. I could handle it better. So alcohol helps to relax. It relaxes muscles. It causes, it has a disinhibition effect. It enhances mood. It has a euphoric effect. It decreases anxiety so that you're not as nervous being in social settings or anything like that. I like girls, but y'all are kind of a little bit scary and hard to talk to initially. So I discovered when I was a teenager that if I had a few drinks, it was easier for me to talk to girls. And I was very shy in social situations where I might have to do something like dance, but I'll have a few drinks, and I don't mind dancing. I'll ask girls to dance and stuff. A few more drinks, I'll ask their daddy to dance. I don't give a damn. So it does something for me, but it does something to me at the same time. And that is why people continue to use the drug. For most people, alcohol does not have a particularly high addiction potential, but its abuse potential is pretty high. There's almost always a phase, it seems, with someone who's a drinker that they have gone through incidences. They've had incidents where they've lost control, they've drunk more than they meant to drink, they've done something stupid, said something silly, paid some kind of consequence for this. And that can happen. But that doesn't necessarily make you an alcoholic. Doesn't make you chemically dependent. When you see a pattern emerging of this kind of behavior, that's when your red flag should go up. When you see this occurring time and time again, that's where we see that problems are arising. Then there's self-medication, and self-medication is a big deal. People feel bad, and they want to take something because they feel bad. And I have to have a drink so I can sleep. I have to have a drink to relax. I can drive better drinking than most people can sober. Something's wrong with you. You need to be on medication probably. But we self-medicate uncomfortable symptoms, feelings, etc., that may even have begun because we started drinking. We'll talk about that a little later. When you realize that you're having problems and you want to solve them, there's a little cartoon on page 107, Loosening the Grip, where the psychiatrist here says, I can give you an antidepressant, and in 4 to 6 weeks you'll start feeling better. And the therapist says, I can work with you in therapy, and in 4 to 6 months you'll start feeling better. And the bartender says, I can fix you a drink, and in 4 to 6 minutes you'll start feeling better. So you can see how the choices might be stacked to go to the bartender. And there is, with people who relief drink, almost an immediate response to the drug that makes them feel better. But that same drug that they take to feel better also has rebound effects that make them feel worse. And then they're back in the state that they were in before they started, except with the rebound effects, which makes it even worse than before they started. And they take the drug again to feel better, and the drug they take to feel better makes them feel better in the short haul, but in the long haul makes them feel worse again. Can be problematic. Substances that have the highest abuse potential are the ones that produce desired effects, which are strong and immediate. Cocaine jumps immediately to mind because it's a very fast rush. It's really intense. It has a short duration, and it has unpleasant rebound effects. And that type of drug invites readministration. It means you use it more and more often. And because it's of short duration, the uses are very frequent. You can use it a bunch of times in a night, partying. So the type of drugs are certainly to be considered when you're looking at abuse potential. Alcohol users are largely social drinkers, although occasionally they may abuse drugs, or they may even frequently abuse other drugs. They frequently abuse alcohol. Cocaine users are not generally social snorters. It gets compulsive real fast. Crack users are not social smokers. It gets compulsive real fast, so that the whole idea we're going to be here together and this is a convivial thing that we're doing with one another falls by the wayside fairly quickly. Also, when you're thinking about social influences or social uses and stuff, when you're using illegal drugs or you're using drugs in a deviant manner, for instance, not having a mixed drink, not having a cocktail, a highball, something along those lines, but spraying an industrial solvent in a sack and huffing it till you pass out, putting a powder, cooking it in a spoon, turning it into a liquid and shooting it into your arm, you've kind of bypassed the social aspects of drug use at that point. Genetics, this is the human DNA chain. Risk factors versus inevitability. This has been a big deal with researchers forever and a day. And when you're looking at the public health model and they're talking about host and agent factors, that's important. But within the host, there's also nature versus nurture factors. And this is where discussions of genetic risk, physiological risk factors come into play, as well as social or environmental factors. It is true that substance use disorder tends to run in the family. So does having red hair, or being tall or short or fat or thin, or having brown eyes or blue eyes, or speaking French or Russian or English. There's a lot of things that go down generation to generation in family, and they're not all genetic factors, but genetic factors seem to be at work in some of them. Alcohol dependence, and this has been something that's been discussed the whole time I've been in the field, may rely on a designer gene or genes. And between nature and nurture, nature seems to support genetic constitutional vulnerability. We know that we can breed rats, for instance, that have propensities to develop dependencies on cocaine or alcohol or heroin, and these rats are genetically are selected and bred for those purposes. We also know from twin and adoption studies where babies born to alcoholic parents are taken out of the home, adopted out, and raised sometimes apart from each other. That the best predictor of alcoholism in one sibling, one of these twins born to an alcoholic parent, the best predictor of substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder in twin A is whether or not it exists in twin B. And this is really interesting because then you look at the environmental factors. And the environmental factors play hardly any role in this at all. It does not matter among these siblings if whether they were raised in a religious home or a non-religious home, whether they were well educated or poorly educated, whether they were rich or whether they were poor, whether they were politically active or not. Nothing else mattered except bloodline. Did they have, first degree blood relatives who were addicted to alcohol? And if they did, the chances were 400% greater that they would have a chemical dependency if they ever used the drug, the alcohol. Studies with non-alcoholic blood relatives also indicated that there are differences in the ways that bodies handle alcohol and how brains experience the effects of alcohol. And we've got real sophisticated in these studies nowadays. We can give people a drink and map their responses with electroencephalograms, EEGs. We can put them in a CAT scan, use a PET scan with them, and watch their brain and what areas of the brain lights up and how, and all those good things. And we know that people who have alcohol-dependent family members who take a drink, they have less response in the brain. Less of the brain lights up than people who have no alcoholic blood relatives. People who are prone to chemical dependency, to substance use disorders, have less response to a dose of alcohol than someone who has less risk to that. This is abnormal tolerance. You'll run across this in counseling. You'll have people tell you, kind of proud and boastful even sometimes, I can drink more than any of my friends. I can't be an alcoholic. I can really hold my liquor. Everybody else is really drunk, and I can still walk a straight line. I don't have a problem with it. I can't have a problem with it. That's abnormal. If everybody else is blasted on the same dosage and you're not feeling much of anything, that's a high tolerance. That's an abnormal tolerance noted. And people who have a markedly reduced response to alcohol are 4 times a lot more likely themselves to become alcohol dependent or to be alcohol dependent than anyone else. As far as genetic markers, as far as making a determination of what this process is, what goes on, whether or not, you have that designer gene, if you will. So there is no single genetic factor responsible for chemical dependency. Because we know that addiction is much more complicated than that. It's not something we can do a simple blood test for and say, oh, well, look, you have an abnormality here in this genetic link, in this genetic sequence, so you can't drink. That's not how it works. Now, under laboratory-controlled circumstances, we know that we can give, we can make the little lab rats be stoners for generations, but even then, it's not necessarily 100% circumstance with high-risk animals. Dopamine D2 receptor genes seems to be a factor in human beings. And this was discovered, maybe 20 years ago. They began to concentrate on dopamine D2 receptors. And there are alleles that are, alleles are variances of a gene. There are different types of a gene. So that there are, the D2 allele A1 is a form of the gene and if you have this particular form of the gene, That constitutes about 69% of the subjects with alcohol dependence that were studied. At the same time, the D2 allele, A2, had only 20% of the people who possessed the A2 allele were chemically dependent in this study. So the A1, but here's an important thing, the A1 form does not make alcohol dependence inevitable, because if you look back at that stat, 69% of the subjects had alcohol dependence with this form of the gene, which meant that 31% of them did not. At the same time, only 20% of the people with the dopamine D2, A2, were dependent. And that means that even though 80% were not, this 20% were. So it's not a guarantee one way or another. It's just a likelihood, and it's a risk factor. You can have both parents that are chronic, stay drunk every minute of their living, breathing, waking lives, and you can come out of that situation and not be alcoholic, even if you drink. But if you come out of that situation and you do drink, you're still 4 times more likely to become chemically dependent than someone whose parents didn't do that. And once upon a time, we thought that was all environmental. It's what you learn to do sitting at your parents' knee. You watch them drink inappropriately and behave inappropriately, and so you grow up behaving inappropriately. And that's true. There's an element to that, but that does not explain addiction, and especially the physiological consequences of it. These D2 gene relationships are complicated, and the dopamine D2 gene is involved in reward sequencing and things like that. There is involved with alcohol metabolization, so that you have quirks in the way your body metabolizes alcohol, probably metabolizing it faster than someone who doesn't have this quirk. And that means if you metabolize faster, you need to drink more to get where other people go with less, putting it simply. This is also related to flushing, to the way that you basically clean out the system. That is related to the increased rate of metabolization of aldehyde hydrogenase, and that's the enzyme that breaks down acetaldehyde and gets it out. So you're moving, again, this is metabolic, you're moving it out more rapidly. Moving the chemical out, breaking it down and getting rid of it at an increased rate, because you have a predisposition towards alcohol use, or because you have been consuming a lot of alcohol over time, is called drug disposition tolerance. It happens faster with people who are chemically dependent, and becomes more pronounced earlier on with people who have a predisposition for dependence. D2 relationships are involved in psychological functioning and cognitions. You kind of lose that a little bit pretty quick with abnormalities in the D2 genes. D2s are involved in postsynaptic reward cascades, and that one of the things that people find, you remember just a few minutes ago, I hope you remember, that the simplistic reason for why people drink is because it feels good. And in certain individuals where you have these D2 relationships that are compromised, the dopamine fix is necessary. This is an explanation for why people get addicted to cigarettes so much, and why people who are dual diagnosed, like bipolar people, get tied in with alcohol and with cigarettes so firmly. is because they're getting a dopamine fix in the reward system. They don't feel good with normally, and they've discovered that smoking a cigarette or having a drink will fix that. You'll reverse that bad feeling. These I might as well call them abnormalities because they are, these quirks that you find genetically in familial systems leads to two different types of alcoholisms, if you will. And remember we talked about this with E.M. Jelinek, and he was talking about his species of alcoholics, the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, etc. But these two types, at the end, the familial alcoholic is characterized by a positive history of alcohol dependence in the family. You've got relatives who are chemically dependent, who are alcohol use disordered. And if that's the case, what you'll probably see in a family is early onset of drinking behavior and more destructive symptomology. Just by fireside induction, just by standing outside that system and looking at it, it's very tempting to say, well, they learned that. If you're a kid growing up in an alcoholic home where, someone may say to you, son, go bring dad a beer. And you bring him a beer and he says, here you go, you can have a drink of it. You're 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I don't know. And he gives you the empty to throw away. You take it in there and you kill what's left in it. I'm speaking from experience. Have a sip there. I did this. My brothers did this. My cousins did this. We did this. And no one thought anything about it. It wasn't a bad deal. No one thought much. And my family, and that's the family that I reference most when I'm thinking about this, the guys who took me to bars, set me up at the table, bought me Cheetos and 7-Ups, taught me how to play shuffleboard and cheat on women. They didn't think they were doing a bad thing to me. However, I was observing and learning. And I wasn't trying to do that either. It's just what kids do in their systems when they, as they grow up and they learn. But so there's that environmental aspect, that learned behavior aspect, which indeed is important. But that doesn't explain how my body reacts to alcohol. And with a familial alcoholism, the quirkiness of the body's responses to this drug that's pretty predictable in other people and pretty unpredictable with this individual is apparent. And generally you see that people start drinking earlier, they drink a lot more earlier, and they have problems a lot earlier, and the problems are more severe. Familial alcoholism generally requires intervention and treatment at an earlier age, too. Some people drink for many years before they develop any problems that are remarkable enough for someone to suggest that they be treated or that they be evaluated for whether or not they have a chemical dependency. But very often with familial alcoholism, you see that at a much earlier age. I might also say at this time that I have seen and worked with kids who have familial varieties of this type of alcoholism, and we don't really make this designation so much from the DSM-5, but it's good to know, it's good to have in your head for understanding what's going on. But I've seen kids as young as 14, 15 years old. They're not borderline anything. They are full-blown and gone drug addicts. They are full-blown and gone alcoholics by that age, and that's generally because with youngsters where people who start using earlier and start really abusing the substance or abusing themselves with the substance is really a more appropriate way of looking at it. They develop those destructive symptomologies earlier, and they start experiencing negative consequences much earlier. Also, with these youngsters, there's not much evidence ever of other types of psychiatric illnesses. You will see that with older people coming into treatment. That if they're in their 20s and up, they're more likely to have a likelihood of other psychiatric illnesses than the young ones. Non-familial, one of the key ways to understand that the drinking is non-familial is you have someone who's older who comes in. It's a later onset. They just now realize that they're having problems. Just now the wife is saying something about it. Just not now the boss has said, you better go down there and get evaluated, Usually with familial drinking patterns, you'll see that they've been in trouble, from junior high school. So that's biology plays a big part in that type of nascent alcoholism or developing alcoholism. The host also plays a big key in this in terms of personality and psychological makeup. CNS depressants are going to depress you. That's what they do, and that's the effect of the drug. That's what we like about the drug, and sometimes what we dislike about the drug. But not too awfully long ago, psychological factors were considered the most important prediction and or precursors of future addictions. That you had trauma in your childhood. A guy that I knew who worked in this field for a long time, John Bradshaw, used to be involved with Palmer Drug Abuse Program. In fact, he's one of the founders of Palmer Drug Abuse Program, and it was which started in the old Palmer Episcopal Church down in Houston with Bradshaw and Father Charlie and Bob Meehan. But anyway, he made documentaries and wrote books and all of this kind of good stuff. And he taught that human beings who get into addiction were shame-based creatures, and we have wounded inner children that we needed to heal, and if we healed our inner child, then our addictions would go away. John Bradshaw was a great man. He's done a lot of good for people. I disagree with him thoroughly on that. My little inner child was drunk most of the time, and he was resistant to healing. And even when he was sober, he was hard to deal with. But meeting psychological needs was considered an explanation for how addiction came about. And it's true that drug use can meet some psychological needs, and it can be comforting. And again, that goes back to self-medication, right? Personality theories, as being a needy person, as having a wounded inner child, etc., and so forth, were applied as explanations for addiction. And to some degree, there's truth in that. In fact, there's a lot of truth in that. But again, it doesn't cover everything. And so, when we talked about it in another context, talking about alcoholic personalities, right? And what that alcoholic personality is. Every trait, every tendency that you list for an alcoholic personality, I can point to someone who has that tendency who's not an alcoholic. And again, if this is what an alcoholic personality is, How come everyone who has it isn't that? And they're not. This doesn't quite add up to the sum total of an explanation for why certain people would become alcoholic. It does fit as a factor that interplays with those physiological realities, that interplays with those biological or genetic risk factors, that interplays with environmental stressors. So it's a piece of it, but it's not all of it. Personality theories, childhood experiences, fixations, etc., to explain developing alcoholism, particularly were jumped on by Sigmund Freud, who said it was an oral fixation, probably combined with latent homosexuality, that made alcoholics. Adler said we're doctoring feelings of dependency. Current thinking places more emphasis on other things, like environment. This guy over here, if you're an older person like myself, maybe you watched him on TV as a kid, the Red Skelton show, and that's Red Skelton. That character he's playing is a character he developed way back in the 40s, before I was born. And he's called Junior, the Mean Little Kid. And Junior, the Mean Little Kid, had a philosophy about the mean things that he did. He would stop when he's considering doing something mischievous or against the rules, and he would say to himself, if I do it, I'll get a whipping. I'll do it, and he would risk that. He would go for it. The quote, wanting just to stay awake, wondering how much I can take. That's from the group Chicago. It's called 25 or 6 to 4. You listen to people of my generations, they'll tell you real quickly it's about dropping acid. The people from Chicago said, oh no, it's talk about the difficulty of writing a song and staying up all night, and it's 25 or 26 till 4. Nah, well, whatever. That doesn't explain why we had acid called 624, does it? Anyway, the drinking and drugging are learned behaviors. You put a kid like Junior here in the room with it, and he doesn't know what to do. You give him a bong and a bag and and a lighter and stuff like that. Someone has to show him how to use it. And the relationship with drinking behavior, someone has to show us how to use it too, and we have to learn. And you don't know the first time you go drinking, and those of you who've gone drinking, you know this for a fact too. You don't know how much to drink. You don't know how to drink it. You kind of watch other people and follow someone else's lead, things like that. For the most part, we have enough positive reinforcements to inform continued use. That's why we do it again, and we liked it. And it did something for us. It feels like it's doing something for us, even while it's doing something to us. I mentioned rational addiction a while ago. This is an economic model of understanding where individuals are constantly evaluating the cost and benefits of their drug use, like Junior, the mean little kid, is doing the action he wants to do worth the punishment that he's going to get. And he usually decides, sure it is. That's something that punishers have a hard time getting their head around, is that we are not intimidated by their threats of punishment. We figure whatever it is we're going to do, we can hang with that. As long as I can handle the hangovers. Substance use disordered individuals are not particularly future-oriented. We're not thinking about tomorrow. We're not thinking, weeks into the future, months into the future, certainly not years into the future. We're looking at, I need something for the head, and I need it right now, and I want to have fun now, and this is what I'll do now, and kind of damn the torpedoes in full speed ahead. We have expectancies about substance use that informs how important it becomes to us, and often how quickly it becomes important to us. We learn from an early age what to expect from drinking. It's either something that we've seen, we've heard, or we've experienced. And what we expect translates into what we do. If I expect to be, sexually successful when I've drank, that probably translates into sexually aggressive behavior. I figure that every woman's there for me. And maybe a couple of you guys too, you never know. What we expect translates what we do. And that informs our drinking patterns. There are temperamental risk factors that are along the way as well. Lifelong predispositions, the book calls them, and this is in your book, and I thought I'd put a page number there for you to reference, but I didn't. Dang, looks like you're going to have to read the chapter. Temperamental risk factors, cognitive thinking, black and white, right or wrong, up or down, hot or cold, that's the way we like it. I don't like ambiguity. So that's a risk factor. Harm avoidance, is a protective factor. If I have a tendency towards chemical dependency, I'm okay with ambiguity. I'm okay with shades of gray. If I tend towards chemical dependency, I'm okay with risky behavior. I'm drawn to it. I gravitate towards risky behaviors and exciting activities. I have a tendency towards being impulsive. I'll say things that are on my mind, often without thinking about them. I'm open with my thoughts and emotions. Sometimes you know what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling, because if you don't, I'll tell you. And not always in a proper manner. So that is predictive of a chemical dependency disorder. Playfulness, doing things just for the sheer unmitigated hell of it, just because I want to, just because, whatever. That can be a problem for everybody, lifelong, whether you're using alcohol or whether you're not, but it predisposes one to alcohol use disorders. Disinhibition and sensation seeking does as well, chasing social and physical risks just because, just for the experience, just to say you've done it. And stressful life events, a thing that gets lost a lot, and people who come up, for instance, in chemically dependent homes, or come up in an environment that is likely to promote a substance use disorder, is our existence itself is traumatic. We're not modeled very good relationships. We may be in dangerous circumstances. We may not get enough to eat. The way our parents discipline us may be horrible. There's all kinds of things that create stress in the individual's life, and a secondary or reactive alcoholism can grow out of that, again, out of the relief drinking that comes with that. And it's the environment where the magic happens, right? And you have cultural factors that include race, religion, political orientation, sexual orientation, economic circumstances, gender roles and expectations, social status, language, and about a zillion other things. Culture is a collection of the beliefs, values, norms, and mores of a group. And we have about a zillion subcultures in with our overarching Western American culture. And we have cultures Eastern coastal cultures versus Midwestern cultures versus Southern cultures versus West Coast cultures, and there's differences in all of those. Gender roles and expectations. If you're gay, lesbian, queer, transgender, and I forget all of them, you probably live in a different world than the rest of us. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, and I'm not doing that to cut you out. I'm just saying that your cultures are different. And sometimes by necessity, sometimes because those cultural differences are forced upon you by exclusion from the main culture. Your social status is affected. You're reduced to less than. Language affects you, not just in the types of language. For instance, if you're a Spanish speaker, maricon does not have the same neutral connotation as homosexual does in English. Maricon's more like faggot or queer. The language that you speak, the ideas that you have, and the way that you express them are also cultural factors that influence whether or not you have a predisposition towards alcohol use disorders. And speaking of attitudes, we don't have attitudes, they have us. Attitudes die about 15 minutes after we do. Father Joe Martin, that's him right there. Hell of a guy, Father Martin. Table 5.1, page 125, Loosening the Grip, has some international comparisons of alcohol consumption around the world and how various countries consume alcohol, etc. Societies have collective attitudes as much as individuals have personal ones. For instance, intravenous drug use versus alcohol use. If I invite you over to my house for dinner, and I offer you a after dinner drink in the living room, would you like a cocktail? Would you like a glass of wine? You wouldn't be too upset about that. It wouldn't bother you too much. If I walked in with a tray that had a few hypodermic syringes on it, and said, "Here, hit up with me," then maybe you wouldn't be so accepting of that. The type of drug that's being used, and when you're using it and how you're using it is a big factor in developing alcohol use. Total abstinence is one factor. If you are abstinent and you never use a drug, you can't be addicted to it. If you never take a drink, you cannot become an alcoholic. There's no such thing as an alcoholic who has never had a drink. Now, I know that there may be some AA members sitting out there going, "No, wait a minute, Bushart, you know as well as I do that we are instant alcoholics, that, everything is right there to be an alcoholic but the alcohol. And when we take the drink, we come home." That completes the cycle. That completes the formula. So all I needed to be an alcoholic was the addition of alcohol. That's not necessarily true. It's not untrue enough for me to want to argue it at length, but it's not necessarily true. You may have a bunch of personality quirks, but you're not an alcoholic until you start using alcohol, and then you got to drink enough to get there. So, ritual use. This is something else. And since I got Father Martin on here, I guess I can talk about that. Some of you might be Catholic and you've been to church and you've taken communion. And you know good and well that when the priest blesses the sacramental wine and blesses the body of Christ, it's no longer wine and it's no longer wafer. It doesn't represent the blood and the body of Christ. It is the blood and body of Christ. And I've had Catholic alcoholics tell me that's why I don't get in trouble when I take communion. It's not wine anymore. I'm protected. God's got his hand over me as protection. A lot of religions use wine and other drugs for that matter to have mystical or spiritual experiences. So that is, that's something too. Ritual use is usually something that doesn't get people in trouble. Utilitarian use, on the other hand, is when people do get in trouble with it, and that's a big problem for us in the United States. If you look at what's acceptable with drinking, when's it okay for you to have a drink? Well, I got in a fight with my wife, so naturally I can have a drink. Or I had a hard day at the office, I need to unwind. Or this is how I relax, and it helps me to go to sleep. And when you're doing that, you have then this is basically self-medicating. This is using the substance not as a beverage, but using it as a medication, as a drug to treat some unpleasant symptoms that you have. And then there's convivial use that we enjoy. We have drinks to have a good time with friends. We have drinks when we go out, that kind of thing. Cultural norms inform the way we use the drug in this particular place, in this particular way. And if we move from one culture to another, then vulnerability to substance use disorders increases. Cultures, for instance, where drinking's forbidden, may have lower rates of alcohol use. Think about Muslims, Mormons, Baptists. But individuals who are steeped in those cultures, who choose to drink, now they have an increased likelihood of the development of substance use disorders. And it may be because, as true believers, they have violated their own beliefs and values, and now they're drinking with guilt, and they're feeling like they're sinning or something, and that makes matters worse. Culturally influenced drinking styles tend to persist even if circumstances change. You can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy, right? And so they carry it with them. There are events that change overall drinking patterns and drug using patterns, such as wars, famines, natural and economic disasters. All of these lead to increased risk as well for developing substance use disorder. On page 130 of Loosening the Grip, there's a discussion of drinking styles, which are culturally influenced and supported. And these styles predict alcohol problems with individuals. I would like you to think about which, if you're familiar with a culture that sounds like this, where there's solitary drinking is a norm. There's over-permissive norms about how to drink, or lack of norms about drinking. There's tolerance of drunkenness. Adverse behavior when you're drunk is tolerated. We excuse it. Oh, yeah, it's just a whiskey talking, He's a pretty good guy. Should never boink the whole football team if you hadn't been loaded. Utilitarian use. Drinking because you're upset. Drinking because your team won or lost or moved to another town or there isn't one. Lack of ritualized or ceremonial use. Having use apart from social familial structures or from overall eating patterns. Lack of child socialization into drinking behavior or norms of drinking behavior. Drinking with strangers, which is a really bad idea given what we know about alcohol and what it does to you and what the possibilities are at that point. Drinking is recreation, where, you replace going fishing, going to ball games, all that stuff with drinking with your buddies. Drinking concentrated in young males predicts trouble for a society and a cultural milieu that stresses individualism, self-reliance, and high achievement. And I know I can hear you there. You're saying, wait a minute, Bushart, that sounds like Texas. Damn right it does. And sounds like most of the rest of the United States, too. Then there's drinking among subgroups and deviant use. Did I just call bikers deviants? Yes, I did. Sorry, boys. I know some of you may be seeing this. But these are deviant subgroups, and they're deviant subgroups largely because they want to be, and also because they're required to be by the society at large. And you talk to any of these outlaw bikers there, and they will talk about, oh man, live free or die, baby. That's me. I ride to live and live to ride, etc. and so forth. And I'm a freewheeler and I do what I want, yada, yada, yada. Not true. You're locked into a subculture that's one of the most restrictive subcultures on planet Earth. They are deviant from overall society because they don't conform to society's rules, but they allow no room for deviance within inside their group. Neither do the Crips and the Bloods. Neither do the Confederate Hammerskins. When you jump off into one of these deviant subcultures where drinking and drug use may be not only tolerated but expected and encouraged or even required, then you don't get to deviate. That's not a piece of action. This, by the way, is the Confederate Hammerskins. Actually, I think this isn't the Confederate Hammerskins, this is Hammerskin Nation. And they've got the cog and the wheel, the two hammers for the working class people that they are. 88, 8 plus 8. H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. That's Heil Hitler, in case you want to know how to read a skinhead's tats sometimes. In some of these organizations, the heaviest drinker sets the pace for everybody else in the organization. They're the ones who like to drink the most. Legal sanctions in the United States, they play a role also. For instance, we attempt to set cultural norms by criminalizing some behaviors, so that if you go outside the norms on these behaviors, then we create deviance when people participate in the behaviors despite the sanctions. Adolescents, for instance, a lot of things adolescents can get in trouble for aren't even crimes for adults. For instance, like driving down the road with a 6-pack of Budweiser when you're 17 years old. The cops can do mean things to you, even if it's not open. Just the fact that you're sitting there with it. You can wind, and that's because of statutory age regulations, drinking age regulations, and things like that. We tax behaviors that we find socially unacceptable, or we may want to curtail or eliminate. So we tax the hell out of cigarettes. We don't tax the hell out of alcohol because they got a better lobby and they haven't been sued and had class action suits against them and things like that. Social sanctions, politics, politicians get involved in this. Going way back into the 19th century, maybe even further into the 18th, politics has always been a part of this. Advertising wars. We've got people promoting their alcoholic beverages and people promoting that you should be sober and not drink at all, etc., that kind of thing. And of course, as I mentioned before, the statutory age regulations. And all of this stuff can be very confusing, by the way, when we look at legal sanctions. For instance, you may be a parent and you have a teenage child and you say, well, I am raising my child, I am socializing him and teaching him norms and healthy patterns of drinking. And so consequently, I'm letting my 15-year-old go with me out to the little spot beer joint and buying him a beer, and as long as he's with me, it's okay for him to drink that beer. Well, yeah, sort of. Well, no, it's not okay. That's really kind of a stupid thing for a parent to do. And yes, I meant a stupid thing for a parent to do. But it may also be an illegal thing for a parent to do. because that child is only allowed to do this right there while you are with him. If you walk out of the room to go to the bathroom and a policeman walks in and he's sitting there, the child's probably going to get arrested. The owner of the bar is going to get arrested. You're going to get arrested, and you're all going to jail and face some kind of consequences for it, because only under the direct supervision of a parent can anyone under the age of 21 use alcohol. And it doesn't apply to your 15-year-old's friends. If you buy his buddy who happens to be with him a drink too and pass him off as your child, then you're contributing to the delinquency of a minor and all that kind of good stuff. However, another thing that's happening there is, despite what society's trying to do with setting guidelines and consequences, we're kind of subverting it. And I drank with my dad when I was a teenager, and he said things like, well, yeah, if he's drinking with me, he's not out there running the streets and getting drunk. Yes, I was. If he's here drinking with me, he's not out there using drugs. Oh, yes, I was. And there were times when I was sitting there with him, I had a number of drugs in me, including alcohol. Sometimes so many as a damn wonder my head didn't explode. But my dad didn't know that. And so he was kind of innocent of how uninnocent I wasn't. Drinking and driving is something that's gotten serious over the past years in the United States, over the past few decades. And it's because of the efforts of a lot of different groups here, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving and lobbyists who are and other agitators who are promoting the drinking and changing the laws. And what used to be a relative slap on the wrist with DWIs turned into a real big deal in recent decades. So if you're popped for DUI nowadays in Texas, prepare to pay some heavy consequences. May involve a little jail time, going to involve thousands of dollars, a loss of license, disruption of your lifestyle. It's not just a stroll in the park anymore. When I was getting my 4, it was more of a stroll in a park. Laws in other nations are sometimes very different from laws in the U.S., and this has gotten Western people in trouble when they go to other places, or American people in trouble when you go to other places. Kevin Barlow and Brian Chambers were hanged for bringing around 5 ounces of heroin into Malaysia in 1986. They were college students from Australia. Wen Tong Ban was hanged in Singapore for trafficking in 2005. Singapore executed 6 men for drug trafficking in 2018. They were Nigerian. So even in Asia, black people get a harsher deal than do the natives than do the non-black natives of those regions. In Bulgaria, if you have 2 DWIs, your second offense is punishable by death. So there are no third offender DWIs. First offense in Costa Rica, and the state sells your car, keeps the money. Then they'll get serious about punishing you if you do it again. Harris County, Texas is the most dangerous place in the nation in terms of alcohol-related crash risks. You're statistically more likely to be involved in an alcohol-related crash in Harris County than anywhere else in the United States. You're more likely to be injured in an alcohol-related crash in Harris County than anywhere else in the United States. You're more likely to be killed in an alcohol-related crash in Harris County than anywhere else in the United States. That's Harris County. I wonder if the sheriff was under the influence there. Don't know. Really? And I had to put this in there, my disclaimer. Come on, you didn't think you'd get through this course without a dramatic car crash photo, did you? Well, there's your dramatic car crash photo. We may have more, but that's the obligatory one. Seriously, though, there's nothing funny about it. People are afraid to fly. They don't want to get on an airplane. But you're much more at risk of dying on your way to and from the airport than you are when you're in the air. You're much more likely to be killed in a car crash than in an airplane crash. Then there's culture. Cultural realities have to be considered when working with the SUD clients. They have to be considered when working with any client, really, because we all come from different cultures. And there's cultural relevance attached to substance use. There's family structure and support. Some cultures don't believe much in treatment, and there is cultural risks associated seeking it. For instance, people may view you as being weak, or people may view you as being less than. You've suddenly, been demoted a couple of notches in social standing and things like that. In any case, no one can be an expert on even the various cultures in the Houston area. I mean, here where we live in the greater Gulf Coast area is one of the most culturally diverse places on earth. I can go outside, get in my car, and be at a restaurant in 5 minutes where people are speaking Russian, or where they're speaking German, or where they're speaking Spanish, or where they're speaking Vietnamese, or where they're speaking Thai. It's just that way. So if I can't be an expert on all of these different cultures, what can I do to be able to work with these people? Well, I'm glad you asked me that too. I practice cultural humility and allow the people from the various cultures to teach me what I need to know to be able to offer them the best services that I can offer them. Acronyms and nation shaping. Acronym city. MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Used to be Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, but they changed it to drunk driving, so no drunks will get their feelings hurt thinking people are against them. FAD, Fathers Against Drunk Driving. SAD, Students Against Drunk Driving. DAAC, Drunks Against Mad Mothers. That's an actual organization, by the way. I don't think it was ever a really popular organization or big. It may be defunct by now, but it's still an actual organization. And what happens for people to affect social change? They see a problem, they define the problem, they formulate solutions to the problems, they agitate for legal sanctions, they agitate for change, they agitate for social norms changing, they agitate. And a lot of this is going on with prevention throughout the United States and using evidence-based strategies to change the way laws are enforced in our areas, to change the ways that advertising takes place, to change the ways that people address drug use in their communities. All of these are factors in how society responds to substance use disorders and how substance use disorders are formed in and affect the community in which they exist. They're complicated. They're developed and maintained and treated in the context of physiology of the individual, context of the society, norms of the society, cultural relevance, and legal restrictions and sanctions. All of that plays into how we as a people deal with these issues among us, and how we as people who have substance use disorders are interacting with the people in our communities and our societies. To consider substance use disorders in all or nothing terms, you either are an alcoholic or you're not an alcoholic. You either are member of society or you're not. You're either a deviant or you're conforming. That can be simplistic, and it can certainly be counterproductive to take that kind of attitude into working with these clients. Far too often, even among treatment professionals, and this is important, and I would like for you to underline this, we confess substance use disorders as an illness. And I say, oh yeah, this guy's got an alcohol use disorder, he's sick. But then in working with him, or in my interactions with him in my neighborhood, as a friend, as a neighbor, or as a family member, I treat it as if it was bad, but nevertheless chosen behavior. I can say it's an illness on one hand, but I treat it as if it were something else. And that, dear hearts, is counterproductive. And look at that. Here we are at the end of another exciting episode of Loosening the Grip. Actually, I do hope you kind of find it exciting. I do. I mean, I'm still fascinated by this subject even after all this time spent in it. I'm not always happy with it. See some really ugly things sometimes, but nevertheless, it is fascinating. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you have in mind that you're going to go out there and do some good, because that's how you affect change. All right, that's it. And as usual, I'll say I really miss having questions and interactions with you guys, but them's the breaks in the plague year, right? I will talk to you soon.